Today's daf is Eruvin Daf Daled. We're going to start at the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Bet. We are 2 lines up from the bottom. We were talking yesterday about, according to the first view, according to Abaye, in the name of Rav Nachman, depending on what the halachic area is, we apply a different standard of Amma. So in the cases where using a larger Amma will produce greater stringency, so we use a larger Amma and we go by the stringent approach. And where having a smaller Amma will yield greater stringency, so there we favor the smaller Amma. So if you wanted to say it in simple terms, where there's a minimum, we use the larger Amma. Where it's a maximum, we use the smaller Amma. Because in both cases we want to hedge our bets and play it safe and use stringency. That's what Abaye said. Now Rava says, and this is where we're starting today, on the second to last line of Daf Gimel Amud Bet, Ve'Rava Mishmei de Rav Nachman Amar Rava, in the name of Rav Nachman. So they're both reporting this in the name of Rav Nachman, 2 different versions of Rav Nachman. So he says, Kol Amot Ba'ama Bat Shisha. No, all Amot are the Amma that is 6 Tifachim. Not 5 tefachim. Not like what Abaye reported in the name of Rav Nachman, that in 2 cases, in Sukkah and Mavoi, we use the 5 tefach amma. He says, no, we always use the 6 tefach amma. He says, El halalu sochakot v'halalu atzevot. The difference is that sometimes the amot are smiling. What does it mean, smiling? It means, now when you mention tefachim, what do? You measure the 4 fingers of the fist to get the tefach, right? It's a hand's breadth. So when it's sochakot, that means that they're loose. Just like when you're smiling, you're loose. When you're sad, you're tight. Okay, so sometimes we use a tight amma. We measure the tefach. It's still 6 tefachim. But if you measure the 6 tefachim with your hand held tightly together versus your hand loose, you will get a different measurement. And that's what he's saying. So when we deal with, when we want to have, so when the fingers are loosely placed together versus when the fingers are tightly placed together.
So somewhere between 5.5 and 7?
Yes, it'll add a small amount on. But still we're talking here about 6 tefachim. Just sometimes a tefach can be a little bit slightly wider. So the amount, if you leave your fingers, let's say loosely, sochakot, so you'll end up with a slightly larger tefach. And if you times that by 6, you'll get the small increase will add up. And if you hold it tightly together, it'll be a little smaller. But we never use only 5 tefachim. We're always using 6 tefachim per amma. Just sometimes we have sochakot. Sometimes the tefach is a little bit wider. Sometimes the tefach is a little bit smaller, but it's always 6 tefachim per amma. This is what Rava says. Now, Metive, we raised an objection. That's kol amot she'amru chachamim ba'ama bat shisha. We raised an objection from a braita that says as follows: that all amot that the rabbis spoke of were the amma of 6. Ubilvad shelo yehu mechuvanot, as long as they are not mechuvanot. In other words, as long as they are not precise. Okay, meaning sometimes they are. Rashi says, kedim mefarish vazil, as it's going to say, shu amot kilaim sochakot, that sometimes the amot are going to be loose. V'shel mavoi v'sukkah atzevot, and sometimes it will be tight. In other words, it's not exactly the same measure of tefach in each case, but it's always 6. Okay, so bishlam al Rava, it makes sense according to Rava, ki hechid lehevyan alalu sochakot v'alalu atzevot, because it's always 6. It's just that we don't have an exact measure of tefach, because sometimes the tefach is a little bit looser, and sometimes the tefach is a little bit tighter. But according to Abaye, you have a problem, because according to Abaye, there are situations where you deliberately use 5 tefachim, not 6. It's not a matter of degree, a loose tefach or a tight tefach, and we're dealing with 6 tefachim. But actually, according to Abaye, sometimes you use only 5 tefachim. So Amar lach Abaye will say to you, Ema amat kilayim ba'ama bat shisha. So what he means is, so Abaye will tell you that what this braita is talking about is the case of kilayim. Because what did I tell you? I told you that all cases, that in the case of mavoi and sukkah, we use 5 tefachim per amma. In the case of kilayim, in the case of diverse seeds being mixed in a vineyard, we use 6. So it'll tell you that this braita is talking only about the vineyard. That's why it says all amot are 6, because it's talking about the vineyard. So then the question is, of course, but wait a second. At the end of this Braita, it says that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Kol amot she'amru chachamim bakilayim b'ama bat shisha. Ubelvad shelo yehu metzumtzamot. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said that all amot that they said with regard to kilayim, with regard to diverse seeds, are talking about an amah of 6 tefachim, as long as they are not held tightly together. So what does that imply? So what it implies is that the Tanna Kama meant all areas we use 6 tefach amah, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying no, specifically in the vineyard we use a 6 tefach amah, and we hold our hands loosely, right? So, but not in other areas, not in all areas, like Abaye is saying. So what is the? I'm sorry. Not in other words, the other way around. Abaye is saying that the other areas are 5 tefachim and only kilayim is 6, right? So, but it seems from the Braita that the Chachamim say that all amot are 6 tefachim in all areas, because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is limiting it only to vineyards and saying no, only in vineyards it's 6 tefachim per amah, implying that in other areas it's 5. But that means that the Chachamim are saying that in all areas they meant 6, not just in a vineyard. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is coming along and saying, no, it's not all areas, it's only in a vineyard. So that's a contradiction to Abaye, because Abaye is saying that no, everybody agrees that in all areas, in all fields, you're going to use the 6 tefach. I'm sorry, that there's a difference, that in other areas you're going to use 5, and only in a vineyard you're going to use 6. But this Braita seems to support the idea that according to the Chachamim, in all areas you use 6, not just in a vineyard. And it's only Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that's limiting it to a vineyard. So what does the Gemara say? Miklal the Tanna Kama kol amot ka'amar. That implies that the Tanna Kama is telling you that amot in all areas are 6 tefachim, and that Abaye is wrong. There is no such thing as 5 tefach amah for sukkah, or a 5 tefach amah for a mavoid. It doesn't exist. So Amar lach Abaye will say, "V'lav mi'ikam Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel ka'e kevati ana de'amri keRabban Shimon ben Gamliel." So what will Abaye say? He'll say very simply, you see that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel agrees with me, right? Because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying that you use a 6 tefach amah only when you're measuring spaces in a vineyard. And that's exactly what I said. And then in all other areas you use a 5 tefach amah. So I was right then. Fine, the other Chachamim disagree. I don't care about the other Chachamim. I'm going with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. What I said was in line with what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says. So the Abaye Vadai Tina'ehi. So according to Abaye, there's definitely a machloket here, and Abaye is taking the position of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, that in all other areas it's 5 tifachim per amah, and in the case of a vineyard it's 6. And the Chachamim say that in all cases it's 6, but Abaye doesn't care about that. However, but le Rava, does Rava agree? Mi lema Tanai, is Rava going to agree that this is a machloket Tanaim? Is he going to agree that he's taking one of 2 positions? Or is he going to try to harmonize the 2 positions? In other words, according to Rava, in all cases we use a 6 tefach amah, which Abaye will agree is the case according to the Chachamim. But Abaye is saying that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel differs and only uses a 6 tefach amah for kilayim, for the case of vineyard. So that's the question. Does Rava agree that this is a machloket between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim? Or is he going to try to say that everybody agrees that we use a 6 tefach amah in all cases? So the Gemara says, no. Le Rava mi le matnai. He's not going to agree. Amar lach Rava will say, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel ha'atal ashma'inan amat kilayim lo yitzamtzem. That all that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is coming to tell you is that when it comes to kilayim, use a loose tefach. Everybody's saying you need a 6 tefach amah for everything. That's what Rava will tell you. Everybody agrees. Nobody holds you use a 5 tefach amah like Abaye says. Nobody holds it. The only thing that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is making sure that you know is that when you're measuring for a vineyard, hold your hand loosely for the tefach when you measure the 6 tefachim, and hold your hand tightly for other things to make a smaller measurement. That's all that he's saying. Really, if that's the case, wait a second.
Wait, loosely for what? For kilayim?
For kilayim, he's saying lo yitzamtzem. Don't make it tight.
Kilayim loosely, and for everything it says loosely for kilayim only, and then for everything else tightly.
For everything else, tightly. That's right.
Okay.
In other words, that's the difference. It's sometimes it's atzevot, sometimes they're tight, and therefore it's smaller. Sometimes it's looser, but so everybody agrees that there's a bigger measurement for kilayim. The question is the bigger measurement, how vastly bigger is it? Because according to Abaye, it's only 5 tefachim for mavoi and sukkah, and it's 6 for kilayim. According to Rabbi, it's always 6. It's just a question of whether you hold your hand loosely to measure the 6. Like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whether you're going to hold it tightly. That's the difference.
I thought 5 for sukkah and
Mavoi
was established. It's not.
That was only what Abaye was saying.
Oh.
That's only what Abaye was saying. So the Rava is not agreeing with that. Now, okay. So now, according to this, v'lema amat kilayim lo yitzamtzem. So if you're right, Rava, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel really agrees that we always use 6 tefachim per amma in all areas. And all he meant to say was, don't hold your hand tightly when you're measuring the tefachim for the purposes of kilayim. But really he agrees that you always count 6 of them. So if that's the case, why doesn't he just say, amat kilayim lo yitzamtzem? That the measurement for kilayim, don't hold it tightly. Why is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel saying, Kol amot shamru chacham bekilayim ba'ama bat shisha? Why does he have to mention that all the measurements that the rabbis said in kilayim is 6 tefachim, implying that in other areas it's not 6 tefachim? Why doesn't he just say that? Why doesn't it just say Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that the amma of kilayim, don't make it a tight amma, make it a loose one. It's the same in all other respects to every other measurement. So lav lema'utei amat sukav amat mavoi, doesn't this actually kind of support Abaye, what Abaye is saying? Because Abaye is saying that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel means that you only use 6 tefachim with regard to vineyards. In other areas you use 5 tefachim. Doesn't that make sense? That's why he mentions the 6. Because he's showing a difference between vineyards and everything else. But Rava's not going to be discouraged. No. Lo lema'utei ama yesod ve'ama sovev. It's coming to exclude 2 other cases where we do use a 5 tefach amma. But I don't agree with Abaye. It's not the case of Sukkah, and it's not the case of Mavoi. What is it the case of? It's the case of the Sovev and the Yesod. This is talking about 2 parts of the Mizbeach. If you look at the Mizbeach, what you had was you had a Yesod going around the Mizbeach. The Yesod was, sometimes it'll say, like in Ezu Makoman, that you pour the blood on the Yesod. What's the Yesod? Or in the Torah it says, El Yesod HaMizbeach. You pour it on the foundation of the Mizbeach. This was an edge that jutted out of the side of the bottom of the Mizbeach, and it was an Amah. Right? This is of the Mizbeach, of the altar. So we're not talking about part of the structure. Let me see if they have a picture here of it. They have a picture?
Yep.
Can we show it around? Let's see. Do I have one? Yeah, I have one too. Yeah, so it's talking about this part at the bottom is the Yesod. That last thing jutting out. There are actually like kind of 3 layers, because there's a Yesod, and then if you go up higher, there's a ledge that the Kohen actually walked on. Okay? So that was also indented in Amma. So that's called the Sovev. The Sovev is where the Kohen would walk. The Yesod is the part of the bottom. So there's 2 indents. There's 2 indentations in the Mizbeach. One indentation is called the Yesod at the bottom. An Amma, it went an Amma high and an Amma in. That was the indentation called the Yesod. And then if you go up further, you see the Sovev. There's another indentation there. That's actually where the Kohen would walk.
That has to be
along. So that,
yeah,
he can't walk in an amma, but the amot that measured the size of it were amot that were of 5 tefachim. Okay, so yes, true. It wasn't only an amma in width, but you measured it by an amma of 5 tefachim. That's all that's being said. So what he said, that's where it's applied. And how do we know that? Dichtiv, as it says in the pasuk in Yechezkel, these are the measurements of the mizbeach. Ba'amot, amma v'tofach. It says an amma and a tefach. V'chek ha'ama. V'chek is talking about the yesod. That's the bottom. Ve'amar rochav ugvula el sfata saviv zeret hayachad ve'ze gav hamizbeach. That's what the whole pasuk says. So this is describing, as the Gemara is going to explain. What does it mean? So the way Rashi explains it here is, there are 2 different explanations. Tosafot, actually, interestingly, Tosafot brings Rashi's explanation from Sefer Yechezkel and likes it better. Rashi gives a different explanation here than he gives in Sefer Yechezkel of this pasuk. Here, what Rashi says is that what the pasuk means to say is that all of these things are within when it says these are the measurements ba'amot amma vatofach. What it means is that everything else is an amma plus a tefach, meaning everything else is an amma of 5 tefachim plus a tefach, and then these things are.
But how does this?
Yes, but an amma can also be defined by
right here. This one.
So
An amma is either 5 tefachim or 6.
Which is
A zeret is a half.
Yeah, but your span from here to here is different than my span.
that's right.
Right.
So
It's another issue.
Right. That's also true. Now it's some kind of average. So
There's a lot of
there's some variation. So and some averages that are created. So the point is what Rashi says here is that what the pasuk means when it says these are the measurements ba'amot amma vatofach. It's saying that it's an amma plus a tefach, meaning that that everything else that's in the Beit HaMikdash is a 6 tefach amma, but these things that are going to follow are a 5 tefach amma. So Safot says no, that's not what it means. What it means is that he interprets it like this: ba'amot amma. When it says amma, it means the large amma. Shiheh amma vatofach b'shel amma bat hey. That it should be an amma and a tefach added to the 5 tefach amma, and then what it's talking about is here in the pasuk is it's listing the things that are 5 tefach amma. But the point is, it doesn't really matter how we interpret the pasuk. The main point is that what's being listed in the pasuk is a 5 tefach amma. The question is whether when the pasuk opens and says amma vatofach, it's introducing what's coming next, or it's describing what has come before. But everybody agrees that what's listed in this pasuk are the things that are only measured by a 5 tefach amma, by a smaller measurement than everything else. Everything else is measured by a 6 tefach amma, and these are measured by a 5 tefach amma. So the way that you interpret the pasuk is a little complicated because it's a little bit vague and unclear. Is it describing is it an introduction, or is it and saying that here are the things that are 5 tefach amma measurement, or is it saying that everything else is a 6 tefach amma measurement, and here are some other things that are not? But either way, it doesn't really matter.
Is an amma the smallest measurement that the top?
No, we have a tefach.
I mean, so,
an etzbah. No, there's an etzbah.
There's an etzbah. Because what I'm thinking is that they're trying to determine amot. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. So amot, to be a little bit more precise, is it a 5 tefach?
Right.
But then the tefach itself is subject to
variations.
To variation.
Right.
So then, do you go to the next? So do you measure it then by etzbah? In other words, is that I'm trying to determine what is the purpose of that, since there are variations in all of the measures.
Well, I think probably because there was a variation, there was like a standard deviation of amma among people. Some people's amma on their arm was like more 5 tefachim, and some was more 6. So they had 2 different kinds of ammot: the larger amma that they would use and the smaller one, because there was a variation of degree. So they would break it down to the smaller measurement of a tefach.
No, but at the end of the day, it's a measurement.
Defining a tefach, because that's what you're saying.
No, because
you're saying there are variations in everything. So
right, of course.
Are there variations in defining a tefach?
For sure, there have to be.
Yeah.
Because how can
variation even if the etzbah?
Yeah, because they weren't using a measurement; they were using their hands. They were using a natural measurement. So yeah, there has to definitely be. There's definitely there's standard deviation here for sure.
Right. In other words, you have to be able to do it without having to use measuring tips or like any outside things. But at the end of the day, you are, you're talking about a measurement. You're not talking about yours versus his versus. So there has to be a consensus as to in general, the tefach of most people is this, and the tefach of most people, it is between this and this. So we're talking, about this in this case, and this in this case.
Right.
So it's.
I hear what you're saying.
Discussion. They're using the tefach as the bottom line standard. They're not discussing variation.
Because they're trying to get to the Amma, so
Right.
they're trying to get to the
Okay,
next
so
level of
that's what they're
precision.
doing now. Who knows? Where it is now. But that's,
Right.
From here to here.
Right, normally, yeah. So let's say, so this is the way that Rashi is reading the pasuk here. It says, "Ve'ela midot hamizbeach ba'amot." This is the measurement of the mizbeach in amot. Okay, amma v'tofach. So when it says an amma and a tefach, so Rashi says that what that means is that ba'amot ketanot bat chamisha, sheyesh ba'ama bat vav benonit, amma v'tefach me'elu. So what it means is that these things, these amot, okay, which it's making a general statement that the amot that are used to measure the following things, okay, a normal amma will have another tefach added to it. So it's a roundabout way of saying these are measured by a smaller amma. Because he's saying that the measurements I'm about to give you of amot, in a normal amma you have to add a tefach. Which is a roundabout way of saying these are a lesser set of amot than the normal one. These are an amot for which, in a normal case, you'd have to add another tefach to make a real amma, because they're a lesser type of amma. Tosafot reads it differently as what the pasuk means, that everything is ba'amot gedolot, that we're talking about an amma gedolah, a large one, which is amma v'tefach, which is the 5 plus 1, which is the 6. However, these things are only 5.
Yeah, see,
okay, so
they're making a complicated thing even more.
In both cases, it's complicated. The pasuk is complicated,
but it's making it even more complicated.
Because according to Rashi, what it says is that these amot that I'm about to give you, in another case, you'd have to add a tefach.
Yeah,
so it's a roundabout way. Whereas according to Tosafot, it's saying that all other things are a large amot except for these. Okay, so it's a little bit smoother, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So now we're going to read what comes out of this pasuk. So he reads each thing to identify what it is here that's going to have the smaller amma. So he says, so he says cheka ama ze yisod. So what's cheka ama? That refers to the yisod, the foundation of the altar, that it's measured by an ama, which is a smaller ama. Ve'ama rochav, and when it says ve'ama rochav, what's it referring to? It's referring to ze sovev. This is the part that the kohen would walk around. Ugvula el sfata saviv, and its border on its lip going around. Elo akranot. This is talking about the horns of the mizbeach that protruded on top, that we know about. V'zegava mizbeach, and this is the top of the mizbeach. Ze mizbeach hazahav. This is talking about the golden mizbeach. So in other words, these 4 things were measured by a smaller unit than everything else. But according to Rav's interpretation of Rav Nachman, all other halachic areas we use a 6 tefach amma, including in the Beit HaMikdash. Even Yechezkel is saying in all other cases we use a 6 tefach amma, except for these 4 things that they used a 5 tefach amma. This is contrary to what Abaye said, that in Mavoy and Sukkah we also use a 5 tefach amma. Now the Gemara goes on. Amar Bichia bar Ashi Amarav. Now we get to a subject that we've actually seen this exact sugya before. We saw it most recently in Masekhet Shabbat. We even saw it not too long ago. And I believe I think it's in Masechet Berachot as well. It says on the side that it mentions it being in Masechet Sukkah, but I know that we saw this in Masechet Shabbat as well, and probably in Masechet Berachot too. So Amar Bechia bar Ashi Amarav. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, Shiurin Chatzitin Machitin Halacha LaMoshe Misinai, that measurements, Chatzitin, the laws of interposition when you immerse in a mikveh, and Mechitzin, the laws of mechitzot, of walls, are Halacha LaMoshe Misinai. These are an oral tradition passed down from Moshe, who received it at Har Sinai. So, right, oral tradition. So Shiurin Deoraita, how can you tell me that the measurements are only Halacha LaMoshe Misinai, that they're passed down orally? Aren't they Halacha LaMoshe Misinai? Aren't they Deoraita? Aren't they written in the Torah? Dechtiv, as it says in the pasuk, Eretz Chita U'Sorah, etc. The pasuk says Eretz Chita U'Sorah, Uteina v'Gefen v'Rimon, Eretz Zet Shemen Udvash. All of the fruits that the land of Israel is praised for, each one of them we learn out. Rav Chanan said, that every fruit that's mentioned, every product of the land of Israel is mentioned in that pasuk to teach us shiurin, to teach us measurements for halacha. What are they? So chita likiditnan, the word chita, the word wheat in the pasuk teaches you the following Mishnah. Hanichnas lebayit hamenuga. If you go into a house that has tzara'at v'kelav al ketefav v'sandalav v'tabe'otav biyadav, and you're wearing your clothing on your shoulders, and you're in other words, they're draped over your shoulders rather than wearing them, and your shoes and your rings are in your hands rather than wearing them. Huvahim tame'in miyad. You and them become tamei immediately, because you're not wearing the clothing. They entered the house and you entered the house, so you both become tamei immediately. However, if hayalavush kelav v'sandalav v'raglav v'tabe'otav v'etzba'otav, if he's wearing his clothing and his shoes are on his feet and his rings are on his fingers, hu tamei miyad v'hin te'orin ad shish'eh b'chtei achilat paras, he becomes tamei immediately. But his clothing, his rings, and his shoes don't become tamei unless he stays in the house the amount of time it takes to eat achilat pras, the amount of time it takes to eat, according to Rashi, 4 eggs worth of food, which is the size of a normal meal. So in other words, you have to stay, because it says va'ochel babayit tichabeset begadav. That's what it says with regard to the mitzorah, to the house that has tzara'at. That habayil labayit kol yimei yizgiroto, that if you come into the house all the days that it is that it's quarantined for tzara'at, you become tameh. But then it says, "Va'ochel babayit yichabeset begadav." If the person eats in the house, then his clothing becomes tameh. In other words, there's a delayed transfer of tumah from the person to the clothes that he's wearing. If he's not wearing them and he carries them in, they immediately become tameh. But if he's wearing them, there's a delayed reaction. They don't become tameh immediately.
He transfers it.
He would transfer it, but only if he stays in there. If they come into the environment by themselves, so they become tameh. But if he's wearing them, then they would only become tameh through him, and only if he sits there for long enough. He has to stay there for the amount of time that it takes to eat a seudah. Now, what's the relevance here? So it says, pat chitin, the amount of time it takes to eat a meal of wheat bread, which is eaten more quickly than barley bread, which is coarser and harder to eat. Velo pat orein, not barley bread. Mesev ochel, sitting down and eating, like reclining and eating, because you eat faster that way, not standing or walking and eating. Beliftan, with something on the bread, with a condiment on the bread, because that helps you eat it faster. When you're just trying to narf down bread, it's harder than when you actually have something on the bread that makes it go down easier. So the point is that it's chita. We use the amount of time that it takes to eat a meal of wheat bread. Where do we get the measurement of wheat bread from? The word chita in the pasuk. So you see that there's a basis for the measurement in a pasuk. Why are you telling me that the measurements are an oral tradition? We see them in the pasuk here. Ditnan and se'orah. Why does it say se'orah in the pasuk? This is all Rav Chanan's interpretation. Rav Chanan is telling us that every word in the pasuk teaches us a measurement that has halachic significance, meaning that these are not passed down as an oral tradition, but they're actually derivable from the pasuk. Se'orah ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, etzem kesorah mitameh b'magao v'masa ve'no mitameh be'oil. That an etzem, a bone of a dead person, the size of a barley corn, can be mitameyu, can make you tameh if you touch it or carry it. Veino mitameh ba'oil. It won't make you tameh if you're under the same roof as such a small amount of bone, but it will make you tameh if you touch it. So the minimum measurement for a piece of bone from a corpse that can make you tameh is a barley corn. So again, it comes out of the pasuk. Gefen, what does it mean? Gefen, vine, okay, kedei revi'it yain l'nazir, to teach you that how much wine does a nazir have to drink. Revi'it, 1/4 of a log, a revi'it yain. Now Tosafot points out that one of these is not like the other, because gefen, what does that have to do with revi'it yain? Well, the measurement is not coming out of the word gefen. The measurement's not coming out of the word gefen, because the measurement is a revi'it. It's 1/4 of a log. How does that come out of the word gefen? Gefen means grapevine. We know that we're dealing with what the Nazir is not allowed to drink is wine. What he's not allowed to eat is grape products. But the word gefen is not teaching you the measurements. So therefore Tosafot says that what it's teaching you is something that Rashi mentions in another Masekhet, not just that wine is what makes because Revi'it is not emerging from the pasuk, but that the way that you measure that the Nazir cannot drink wine, he also can't eat, let's say, grape leaves or things from the grape vine. So how do you measure grape products? You measure them by displacement of wine. You measure them by liquid displacement. You don't measure them by a kazayit, like you would normally measure a food that you're not allowed to eat. You measure a kazayit, an olive's worth of most things. But for this, since the fundamental prohibition of the Nazir is drinking wine, all other measurements related to the Nazir go by wine. So if you want to know how many grapes is he not allowed to eat, or how many grape leaves, the amount that would displace a revi'it of wine out of a cup. If you had a cup of wine, the amount that would displace out of the cup a revi'it of wine is the amount that is prohibited, because we use as our basis the geffen. That's the word geffen is teaching you, that we use as our basis for all the measurements of the Nazir, we use wine.
I have a question on the premise of the sugya. Well, I thought that when we say halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that included what's in the Chumash. We don't.
No, halacha l'Moshe Sinai is distinct from a deoraita. Deoraita is something.
We don't derive halachot from.
No. Something that can't be shown from a pasuk. That's only known as Gemara Gemirila. The Gemara will say. Okay. For example, when we talked about how do you know that you can't carry an object 4 amot in a Reshut Harabim? It never says it in the Torah. Right. So it says Gemara Gemirila. We have it's a tradition. That's it. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. How do we know it? We just know it.
But we know everything from halacha l'Moshe.
No, but if it's written in the Torah, or we can derive it from some other sources, so then we don't call it halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai means something which is like an axiom. It's axiomatic, passed down from Moshe.
Okay, so
it's not something.
Because I thought that
it's a technical term.
Everything is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Mm-hmm. And if there is a doubt,
it's like, how do you know?
And our job is to kind of take what's there and relate it to halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and if we find it great, otherwise it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and that's where it goes.
Oftentimes at the end of the discussion, that's a conclusion when they can't find a source. But whenever something's introduced as halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it means that there's no basis for deriving it. So, for example, in Hilchot Tefillin, almost all the halachot of how to make tefillin halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Why does it have to be black? Why does it have to be square? It doesn't say that in the Torah. You're not going to be able to derive that from any pasuk. It's not going to be shown from anything. So that means
there is no mention of this in the Torah.
Right. There's no reference.
So here we're talking about when there's no mention in halacha l'Moshe Sinai. In other words, it's something that's not covered in halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
Halacha l'Moshe Sinai are those things which don't have any source in a text.
In other words, here
there's no textual source.
But if it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai and there is a source,
then it's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai anymore. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai are those things that we can't find a source. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah and he gave us how to derive things from the Torah. But there's a separate category of things that we can't derive on our own. We won't be able to find it. We just know it as an axiom, axiomatic.
It doesn't matter whether you have a source or not. It's still halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
That's true, but you're using the term in a descriptive way, and I'm using it in a technical way. In other words, in a descriptive term, narratively, historically, it's all from Moshe.
Okay.
That's not what we're saying. But when it says halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it's using it as a technical term for those halachot that we only know because they were passed down orally from Moshe.
And that makes a difference.
And if we had the Torah and tried to derive it, we wouldn't be able to find the source.
Right. So in this,
it only makes a difference because here they're saying these things are not derivable from the text. You just have to know them. If somebody didn't tell you the measurements, you wouldn't know them. You would never find out kazayit. You would never find out any of these measurements from the Torah.
And that was being pointed out.
Okay? So the Gemara is saying, really? You have to know? Somebody has to tell you? It's not true because you can learn it from the pasuk. That's the whole thing. So now we get te'ena is the next word as we turn to Amud Bet. Te'ena. Kegrogeret lahotzat Shabbat. That's where we get the idea that how much food do you have to carry out on Shabbat for it to be a violation of Shabbat? A fig's volume, right? Rimon, the word rimon in the pasuk, what does it teach you? Keditnan, we learned about this in Masekhet Shabbat too. The Mishnah called Klei Balei Batim Shiuran Karimonim. That anything that a person has that's tameh, it will lose its status of tum'ah if it breaks a hole in it the size that a rimon, that a pomegranate could go through. Because if a pomegranate can go through it, it's considered completely broken. If an olive can go through it, okay, you'll use it for bigger things. But if a pomegranate can go through, now it's broken for sure. Eretz zechemen. Udvash. Then it says Eretz zechemen. Okay, a land of oily olives. Eretz shekol shiurei kezetim, which means a land that all of its measurements are kezetim, right? Because the most common measurement is kazayit. We always say, kazayit. An olive's worth. So kol shiurei asal kedatach. Are you telling me all its measurements are a kazayit? Va'ika haneda amaran. You just told me a whole list of things that aren't a kazayit. How can you tell me all the measurements are a kazait? Ella ema eretz sherov shiurei kazetim. The reason why it says eretz zet shemen, a land of olives, is because most of the measurements are kazait, not all of them. Devash, why does it say devash? And we know that devash in the Torah is not referring to bee honey, but it's referring to date honey. So it's referring to dates. Ki kotevet agasa liyom kippurim. That the amount that you have to eat on Yom Kippur to violate Yom Kippur is not a kazayit, but a kikotevet, the size of a date, because on Yom Kippur we go by inui, what gives you a sense of satisfaction. Not what's technically a legal act of eating, like a kazayit, but what's going to satisfy you psychologically, which is a date size. Now, v'tizbera, so what was the problem here? The problem here was that we originally asked, how can you tell me that all the measurements are an oral tradition and I would not be able to derive them from the text if I didn't have the oral tradition? That's not true. Because you just showed me that you can derive all of these things from the text. So the Gemara says, V'tizbera, is that really... Think about it for a second. Shi'urin michtav ketivei, does it really say in the Torah these measurements? Right. Not really. Ela hilchetanin, really they're an oral tradition. V'asmechinu rabanan akra'eh. What the rabbis did was they came along and they connected these measurements to the pasuk. Right. So if Matthias wants to remember all of the measurements in halachic measurements, he can remember this pasuk and it will remind him of a lot of the cases of measurements. But not that they really derive it from there. It's not really derived from the pasuk. It's really known only from oral tradition, and this pasuk is a mnemonic device. It's a wonderful mnemonic device to remember all of them. So now we get to the next thing that it said was an oral tradition. Chatzitzin, interpositions. When you go to the mikveh, you can't wear a sweater, you can't wear a band-aid, you can't wear contact lenses even. Right? We know a chatzitzot you're not considered to have immersed in the mikveh if you're wearing clothing, for instance. So chatzitzin deoraita ninhu. How can you tell me that the concept of chatzitza is oral tradition? It's right from the Torah. Dichtiv v'rachatzet kol bisaro. It says that you need to wash your entire body in water, which means shelo yeh davar chotzetz ben bisaro lamayim. Which means that you don't want to have anything in between your body and the water. That's the definition of immersion in a mikveh. We know that. You go in naked. You don't go in with clothes on. So, bamayim, it says bamayim b'mei mikveh, that you can go into a mikveh, meaning it doesn't have to be mayim chayim. It doesn't have to be a living water, flowing stream. It could be even a collected body of water like a mikveh. Kol bisaro mayim. What does it mean, kol bisaro mayim? Shekol gufo, kol bisaro, what does it mean, kol bisaro? Mayim shekol gufo ole bahen. That the definition of a mikveh is a body of water that is large enough, or a collection of water that's large enough that your entire body can fit in. Bekamahen, ama alama, birum gimal amot. It means one amma by one amma, so a length of one amma, a width of one amma, and a height of 3 amot, which is v'shiaru chachamim me mikveh arba'im se'ah, which they said was 40 se'ah of water. That is the measurement for a mikveh. So therefore, since we see that the Torah is pretty clear here, and of course we've been reading what's derived from the pasuk, but still v'rachatzet kol bisaro b'mayim is pretty clear that your whole body has to be immersed in the water. So the idea that there shouldn't be a davar chotzetz could easily be derived from that. I wouldn't call that a stretch to derive that. It's derived from the pasuk for sure. So what do you mean that it's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai? So what it says is ki itzarech ilcheta l'sa'aro. What do you need an oral tradition for? For se'ar, for hair. For the hair of a person. Uked Rabba bar Rav Huna, like Rabba bar Rav Huna said, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Nima achat kishura chotzetzet, shalosh enan chotzetzot, shetayim eni yodea. So what he says is, if you have one piece of hair that's tied onto itself, that's chotzetz. Why? Because it's one piece of hair, if it's tied in a knot, the water cannot penetrate. 3 tied together are still loose enough that water could penetrate. Because if you have one fiber tied in a knot, it's like impossible to get it out. Right? 3, there's already space in the knot, there's air. But 2, I don't know, said Rabba bar Rav Huna. But still the Gemara, so maybe that's the halacha l'Moshe miSinai, that even one hair being tied is no good. So the Gemara says, but still, but se'aro nami deoraitahu. Even the fact that hair has to be immersed, we could derive from the Torah. The Tanya says in the Braita, v'rachatzet kol bisaro, et etafil bisaro, v'zeu se'ar. Because it says he should wash et kol bisaro. The et kol besaro means even that which is an extension from his body, meaning his hair is also included.
Entire thing.
I agree with you. No,
it's like they're deriving.
They're
because
deriving.
To me, clear.
That's a halacha Moshe Sinai.
It's saying v'hi chatzitza afilu tsear, in the text itself.
You're saying right. They're operating with a 3-tier.
Right.
System.
In other words,
right. Their system is there's what's written miforash. There's what you can derive with the Yud Gimel Midot of derivation.
Okay.
Right? And then there's the Midot Shetorah Nidreshet Behen. That's not Halacha Moshe Sinai according to them. In other words, there's 3 levels. There's level number 1 is what it actually literally says. Level number 2 is what you can do with Midrash Halacha, what you can derive with the Midot Shetorah Nidreshet Behen. And level number 3 is, even if you use the Midot, you're not going to be able to find it. Like, what should a Kazayit be? What measurement should there be for eating? You can't derive it.
You can't derive, right? They have to go to...
So, this, you could say et kol bisaro, the extra word. We know that one of the midot shetorah nidreshet behen is that means something. Okay, what does it mean? It means hair. So they'll say that's not so far removed. That's midrash halacha. That's using the midot shetorah nidreshet behen. So now... So that also...
One se'ar can create chatzitza.
If it's knotted together. That's why when a lady goes to the mikveh, she has to comb her hair out to make sure that it's not knotted. Yeah, so now ki atai hilcheta. What is the halacha coming to tell you? Lirubo ulmiuto ulmakpid ulshe'en makpid. For majority and minority, makpid and she'en makpid, that which you are concerned with and not particular about. Now, the easiest way to learn this is actually the way Tosafot and the Rambam do, not the way Rashi does. I'll mention what Rashi says in a second, but first I'm going to read it the way that the Rambam and the way that Tosafot understand this, and most of the Rishonim understand this sugya here. Okay, the Rabbi Yitzchak, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, Rabbi Yitzchak says, Devar Torah, according to the Torah, Rubo makpid alav chotetz, v'sheno makpid alav eno chotetz. That according to the Torah, the only time it's considered a chatzitza is if the majority of your body is covered and you care about it. In other words, you're covered in mud, the majority of your body is covered in thick mud, and you care about it, you want it off. However, if, let's say, I'm just using that as an example, whatever, in anything, plastic, it could be anything. So vigazru, I'm sorry. So what is he? So right. So the chotetz sheno makpid alav eno chotetz v'gazru al rubo sheno makpid mishum rubo makpid ve'al miuto makpid mishum rubo makpid. So what he said was that really you need 2 qualifications. You need what we would say quantity and quality. It has to be that the majority of your body is covered with some interposition, so that the majority of your body isn't touched by the water. And shemakpid alav, quality means you want it off of you. You want whatever's covering you, you're makpid, you don't want it on you. But if you're covered with something, the majority of your body, and you don't mind it, you like it, okay, like your clothes. Let's say you put a bathing suit on, or whatever, and you want to go in the water with it, even though it covers the majority of your body. Make sense? So, according to the Torah, since you don't mind that what's on your body, you don't mind going in the water with it, even if it's covering the majority of your body, it would be okay. Okay, according to the Torah. And if something's the minority of your body, like let's say you have a ring on your finger, but you're makpid alav, and you're makpid alav, you wouldn't normally go with this ring into the water, right? So, still, according to the Torah, it's qualitatively a problem. But quantitatively, it's only a miyut, it's only a small amount. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, rabbinically, midirabanan, what do they say? If you have quantity without quality, or quality without quantity, it's no good. So what does that mean? If the majority of your body is covered by something, even if you don't care, you don't mind going in the water with it. You put a cloak on and you don't mind going. Still, it's going to be considered chatzitza. And if you have a minority of your body covered like a ring, but you would normally take that ring off. You don't want that ring on your body when you go in the water. So then, that's going to be called, that's also going to be chatzitza. Because it has one of the 2 qualifications. It has quality, the quality of you not wanting it to be there. Okay? And it also has the quantity, either the quantity or the quality factor.
You're saying technically that would be okay. It would not be okay if you want to be makpid, right? Is that's the...
Right. So now the Gemara says, but wait, v'ligzor nami al miuto she'eno makpid mishum miuto ha'makpid inami mishum rabo she'eno makpid. But why don't the rabbis go this far and say, if you have any chatzitza, even if it's a tiny thing on your body and you don't care about it, you don't care about it going into the water and you don't care about taking it off, you would just leave it there forever.
In other words, if you makpid, go all the way.
Right. If you're going to be strict, say that any small interposition should always be a problem, whether you care about it or not, whether it's small or not. So they didn't do that. We're not going to go that far. We're going to say that since even having one or the other characteristic is only rabbinically considered an interposition, we're not going to say even if neither of them are present that it's going to be an interposition. So let's say, for example, you go to the mikveh and you have you want to immerse your pot in the mikveh, right? A pot, right? Tevilat kilim. So you have to take the stickers off, right? So what if the sticker is a tiny sticker and you say to yourself, you know what? I'll just leave that sticker on there. I'm never going to take that sticker off. It's too much work to get it off, even to use the pot. I'm not going to take it off. You don't have to take it off. That's mi'ut.
Right.
That's mi'ut. It's a small amount. Ve'eno makpid. And you don't care about it. You're just going to leave it there anyway. If it were mi'ut and makpid, you said, I'm going to take that sticker off. I just don't feel like doing it right now. Then you have to take it off. Because since you care about it and you want to remove it, it's mi'ut and makpid. You care about it. If it's covering the majority, let's say it had a wrapper around the majority, and you said, I'm just going to leave that on there, I don't even care. Even though the majority is covered with stickers, I'm just going to leave it on there. You can't, because it's the majority.
Right.
But if it's a minority, and you're not makpid, the rabbis didn't make a gezerah in that case. Since deoraita, only if the majority is covered and you're also makpid, is it prohibited? Or is it really an interposition? So they also prohibited, the rabbis prohibited when it's either you care about it and it's a small amount, or you don't care about it and it's a large amount.
Because otherwise you'd have to remove the screws from the...
Right,
and anything that's... right.
Well, that's part of it though.
Right.
That's part of it though. So they didn't go so far as to say that if you have mi'ut and she'eno makpid, that if it's a tiny amount and you don't care about it, that you would have to remove it. Okay, so that's what he says. So this concept, this principle of chatzitza about the majority and minority,
it's like the in Shulchan Aruch, Echad Shishim.
but similar. It's similar. Yeah. So this is a halacha Moshe Misinai. This idea. Now, the reason why I mentioned Rashi has a totally different understanding here, that this is all talking about hair still. That what it means when it talks about the majority or the minority, caring or not caring, is interpositions in the hair. Let somebody says, Rashi uses the example of dirt or mud in their hair. Okay? That if there's a tiny amount but they don't care, it would be okay. If there's a tiny amount and they do care, it would be rabbinically not allowed to go to the mikveh like that. If it was a majority of the hair and you didn't care, it would be rabbinically problematic. But according to Rashi, if you have an interposition anywhere else on your body, even a small amount, and even if you don't care, it would be a problem. Only on your hair do we have this special leniency. But the other Rishonim say, no, this is talking about your whole body, not just your hair. Now, the third thing that we said was a halacha Moshe Misinai was mechitzot, partitions. So mechitzot deoraita ninhu aren't partitions actually from the Torah. The Amar, as the Master said, Aron tisha v'chaporet tefach harekan asara. That the Aron was 9 tefachim tall, and the kaporet was 1 tefach, which makes 10. To show you that since it was called Amah v'chatzi Amah, right? We know it was Amah v'chatzi Amah, so that equals 9 tefachim. So Rashi says, Aron govo tishat tefachim, dechtiv Amah v'chatzi komato, that it's 1.5 in height, 1.5 amot in height, and we know that an amah is 6 tefachim for most things. So 1.5 is 9 tefachim. Plus you have the 1 tefach kaporet. So what do you see then? You see that shows you that that's the measurement. That's the minimum measurement for a mechitza. Is the wall of the aron, that it was 10 tefachim. So lo tzricha leRabbi Yehuda damar amat binyan ba'ama bat shisha, amat kelim ba'ama bat hamisha. We need the halacha Moshe Misinai for Rabbi Yehuda, Because Rabbi Yehuda said that actually the Aron and the Kaporet were only 7.5 tefachim tall. Because according to him, the Aron was measured by a 5 tefach ama, which means that it was only 7.5 tefachim, right? Because it was 1.5, which would be 7.5 plus an additional tefach, so the total would be 8.5 tefachim, including the kaparet. So that wouldn't teach you that a mechitza has to be 10 tefachim. That would teach you only 8.5. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need a halakha to tell you 10. But then it says, but Rabbi Meir damar kolamot hayu benonit mai ikala memar. But according to Rabbi Meir, that says that everything was done with a 6 tefach amah. And therefore, we already know from the Aron and the top of the Aron, the Kaporet, that 10 tefachim is the minimum size for a mechitza. Why do we need a halacha leMoshe miSinai about mechitzot? So, ma'ika lemeimar leRebbe Meir ki atay hilcheta legod v'lalevud uledofen akuma. What it meant when it said that there were oral traditions from Sinai regarding mechitzot, it was talking about areas of mechitza, areas of partition that are these very abstract areas that we use in sukkah a lot, like gud achit and gud asik, which means that if you have a wall, we envision the wall as if it lowers and closes, or we envision a wall as if it goes up and closes. Like let's say your mechitzot are far away from your sechach, they don't reach the sechach, but they're 10 tefachim tall, the walls of the sukkah, but the sechach is resting way above it. It doesn't matter. We say that it goes up. Gud asik, we say that it goes up, right? And if, let's say the mechitzot come down and there's space at the bottom, we say gud achit, that it comes down. Even though there's space at the bottom, physically, conceptually, we say it's sealed. These are halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. Or lavud means that if there's a space between two things that's less than 3 tefachim, we look at it like it's closed. Even if there's a physical space, we look at it like it's closed. And dofen akuma, we talked about that already. That if you had, let's say in your sukkah, sechach pasul, there was invalid sechach on the end of the sukkah. Let's say you had sechach on the roof, and and next to the wall, the part next to the wall, you put some metal bar or something instead. That's considered like an extension of the wall. We look at the wall like it's bent over, dofen akuma, and it comes to reach the sechach. So we don't look at that as invalid sechach on top of the sukkah. We look at it as an extension of the wall, and as if the wall curves around. That's why at the end of the sechach, you're allowed to have a larger amount of sechach pasul on the end of a sukkah. At the edges, on the perimeter of the sukkah. Because we say on the perimeter of the sukkah, it's considered as if the walls are bending in. That's dofen akuma. It's not considered like sechach pasul. It's not considered invalid sechach. So these halachot, these concepts where we basically, that's an example. Where these concepts where we go against the physical reality.
Page 3b2.
It's in there.
The note.
Yeah. It's
3b2.
Instead of looking at the physical reality, we look at the conceptual reality, and we go against the physical reality in a certain way. These are halachot de Moshe miSinai. These are traditions that come to us orally. We can't derive them from any pasuk, but they were received as oral traditions, and that's what it meant when it said that the halachot of mechitza, of partitions, were handed down orally from Sinai.